long had you known Jack Stevens?
Oh, on and off for about 10 years. We'd worked together on about 4 or 5 jobs, I suppose.
So you didn't always work together?
Oh, no, you see, a good steel erector earns far more money by going freelance. You know, do one job, then move on. After a while, you get known in the business, and while you're working on one job, you get the next one lined up. Well, if you're reliable, like, say, me and Jack, well, you never stop working.
So, like yourself, he went from job to job?
Oh, yeah, because he was reliable. Well, Jack could get taken on any site, any time. A gaffer would always find a place for him because, well, I mean, he knew he'd put in a fair day's work. And on top of that, he never caused no trouble.
Now, in your opinion, Mr. Morgan, that of a charge hand and a shop steward, and a man who's been in the business over 15 years, until what age would Jack Stevens have been able to gain regular employment as a steel erector?
My lord, this is a purely hypothetical question.
I cannot agree, my lord.
Mr. Lloyd, I don't think the witness is qualified to say what the future demand for steel erectors would be. I do think he can say, having worked with the man, what kind of physical condition he was in and so on.
As your lordship pleases.
I'm obliged, my lord. Mr. Morgan, in your opinion, could Jack Stevens have physically gone on working until the age of 52?
Definitely.
A moment, Miss Tate. Mr. Morgan, do you personally know of many steel erectors aged 52 and above?
Well, not many, my lord, perhaps 2 or 3. But then Jack was the exception rather than the rule. I certainly would have been willing to work with him.
Now, Mr. Morgan, I'd like you to describe the events that led up to this tragic accident on March the 15th and what followed it.
Yeah, well, we came off the bridge that night at 8 o'clock. 12 hours we'd done that day. We were putting in a fair amount of overtime because the job was behindhand. Anyway, we was all wet and tired.
It had been raining then?
Oh, yeah, it always does in that part of the world. It's a sort of fine drizzle all the time. There wasn't much wind about, but what there was kept coming in gusts. It's dangerous when it's like that. Anyway, we clocks off and goes down to the canteen for a warm-up and some grub.
As far as you were concerned, you'd finished for the day.
True. All I wanted was me pit.
Pit?
Bed.
Do try and use words we can all understand, Mr. Morgan.
Sorry.
And what happened then?
Well, we hadn't been in the canteen more than 20 minutes when Walker, he's the site foreman, he comes steaming in hell of a flap. He says that Porton...
Mr. Porton being the managing director of the defendant company.
That's right. He says that Porton's turned up and we've all got to go back up to work again. Well, I told him straight up he could
Mr. Morgan, were you given any reason for this urgency?
Oh, yeah, there was some cock and bull story that the governor had heard a gale warning on the car radio. A false 9, he said. He said if we don't get up and do the middle link-up, that the old bridge could come down. Well, I told him I didn't believe it. I mean, there was hardly any wind at all, you see. Anyway, I goes out to talk to Porton direct, but by then, well, he's just driving off the site, isn't he?
And what had happened by the time you went back to the canteen?
Well, Walker had already persuaded Jack and a couple of the lads to go back up again, so there wasn't much I could do except agree. So I said, all right, we'll go back and do just the middle link-up. But that's all.
Mr. Morgan, before you continue, would you explain to myself and the jury in simple layman's terms exactly what you mean by link-up?
Yeah, but all right. Well...
Perhaps the model might help.
Oh, yeah, tar. Well, on a suspension bridge like this that's built across a river, well, the whole thing is built up on both sides at the same time. And you build the whole thing up both sides at the same time, and it's built out bit by bit, until finally there's just this gap in the middle. And then, well, you link it up.
But how is it physically done?
Oh, you bolt across some RSJs, rolled steel joists.
Metal girders?
That's right. Yeah, well, of course, once that's done, it's all much stronger because the whole thing's in one piece.
But immediately prior to this linking up, the bridge is at its greatest risk.
Oh, yeah.
So a force 9 gale would have been a real threat.
Yeah, but I mean, except that night there wasn't no force 9 gale, nor the next day. It was just a trick by Porton and Walker to con a bit more work out of us because the job was behind, and it nearly cost Jack his life.
Mr. Morgan, we will all get along a great deal better if you will confine your evidence to the facts and don't make accusations of that kind.
Just answer the questions, Mr. Morgan, that's all. So, having already done a 12-hour shift, you and your men agreed to go back to work.
We were persuaded, but only because we believed what we was told, that it was an emergency. Otherwise, none of us would have gone back.
Now, were you or any of the men issued with safety belts?
No. The shed where they was kept was locked.
Did you see this for yourself?
Yeah, well, it was most of the time. I'd been on at Walker about it for months.
Did you try to get the key?
Well, it wasn't no point. Walker always had it, and he was on the other side of the river by then, organising the other gang.
I see. And what happened then?
Well, we climbed up the first set of ladders here, and the next set of ladders was along here, and to get to them we had to go along an RSJ 20 feet.
And how wide was this RSJ, this, girder?
9 inches.
Was there a safety net beneath you?
No.
Were the weather conditions the same as earlier? Drizzling rain and wind coming in gusts?
Yes, it was.
So you and your men were asked to walk along 20 feet of 9-inch wide girder, wet with rain and with no safeguards whatsoever?
Yeah.
Was it at this point that the accident occurred?
Yeah. A couple of the lads had already gone across. I came next, and Jack was last. I got about halfway across, and I heard a shout. Well, as I turned, Jack was already falling. Well, we all got down as fast as we could, but by the time we got there, he was already lying there as he'd fallen in the mud. Well, at first, I thought he was dead. And then I saw him breathe. And, well, then we called the ambulance, and they took him away.
Now, after the ambulance had left, did you return to work?
No, none of us did. I followed on to the hospital.
And what happened when you did return to the site?
I had a flaming row with Porton and Walker, that's what happened. I told them that we shouldn't have been sent back up and that Jack should have had a safety belt. Walker says he could have had one and takes me down to the shed. Well, of course, by that time it's open, isn't it? I mean, they've had time, haven't they?
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
You've said that the shed where safety belts were kept was always locked.
Yeah?
Always? Last February, for instance?
Yeah.
Am I not right in saying that in February of last year, you led an unofficial strike for better working conditions?
It might have started out as unofficial, but the union soon backed us up, and we won. The company met all our demands.
So I believe. And yet in this strike for better working conditions, no mention was ever made that safety belts were not available. Well, I put it to you that you didn't mention them because they were available.
No.
Or was it then that the men weren't interested because they don't wear safety belts? Do you regularly wear a safety belt, Mr. Morgan? Do you?
Well, no, but I mean, that's hardly the point, is it? I've seen Jack wear one, and he would have done that night, but he couldn't get at them.
Did he actually ask for one?
Well, no, I've already told you there wasn't no point. I yelled out to the lads that the shed was locked again.
Well, you're saying that he didn't wear a belt because of what you told him.
Look, I was standing 6 foot from the shed. I could see it was locked. I'm not blind, you know.
Well, I suggest that door was not locked, merely closed.
No.
Now, you say that you've known Jack Stevens for 10 years and were friends.
That's right.
And that while he was away, you were in the habit of taking his wife out.
Well, yeah, but it was like Carol said, mostly with friends.
Jack Stevens never objected.
Well, no, he was only too pleased that she was being taken care of by someone he could trust.
What were the names of these friends?
Friends?
The people you and Mrs. Stevens went out with. What were the names?
Well, I can't say as I remember.
You're a communist, I believe, Mr. Morgan.
Oh.
My lord, I cannot see that the witness's political beliefs can have any possible bearing on this case.
Neither can I, Miss Tate.
As your lordship pleases. Mr. Morgan, it is a fact, is it not, that you and Mr. Stevens had a political argument on the night of March the 14th that ended in a fight?
Fight? No, it was more of a difference of opinion.
Are you saying then that no blows were struck?
Well, there might have been a bit of pushing, but that sort of thing often happens. It's
Did
all
you
forgotten the next
strike
day.
him? Please answer yes or no.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it was all over in a flash.
And did it stem from a political argument?
Well, only vaguely. Jack had some plans for a shop, and he was looking at them. And, well, I made some crack about him becoming a right capitalist, that's all.
Oh, I see. And that's why blows were exchanged? No other reason? No mention of Mrs. Stevens, perhaps? When you and your gang came off duty and went into the canteen on March the 15th, did you all have a drink?
Yeah, I had a beer.
What did Mr. Stevens drink?
I can't say I remember.
Was that because you weren't on speaking terms?
No, I was more interested in food than drink.
So you don't know how many or what type of drink Jack Stevens had that night?
No.
Now, have you any idea why Stevens agreed to go back to work when you, his close friend and charge hand, were so against it? Did he give you a reason?
No, I can only assume that Walker had persuaded him.
Was he drunk?
Certainly not.
Or was he perhaps trying to prove to you that despite his age, physically, he was the better man?
No.
Are you quite sure that you and Mr. Stevens weren't engaged in some test of physical daring on the bridge that night?
No, definitely not.
Mr. Morgan, why is it that you don't wear a safety belt?
Well, because they're more of a hindrance than a help. They're bulky and they sometimes catch on things. But I do wear them sometimes. I mean, when conditions are dangerous, like on that night.
And would you ever engage in a test of daring while working at height?
Never. I've been in the business too long to mess around like that. We got a saying, one arm for yourself and one for the governor. And if you want to stay alive, it's a saying you remember.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
You may stand down, Mr. Morgan. Miss Tate.
My lord, as my next witness is a doctor and can only stay for a short time.
You would like him heard before lunch,
If possible, my lord.
Very well.
I call Dr. Mackay, my lord.
I take it you will not be long, Miss Tate.
No, my lord. Are you Dr. Gordon Mackay, Senior Casualty Officer at the Karen District Hospital?
Yes, ma'am.
And you live in the hospital?
Yes.
Only a few questions, Dr. Mackay. At what time was Mr. Stevens admitted to the hospital on the night of March the 15th?
9:40.
And it's been agreed that the accident occurred at 8:35. Well, that means it took 1 hour and 5 minutes for him to reach the hospital.
Yes, but you must remember the ambulance had a 15-mile journey either way. And because of the condition of the patient, the return journey had to be taken gently.
So, in your opinion, Doctor, Mr. Stevens received treatment at the earliest possible opportunity?
He did. After I'd completed my initial examination, I phoned the specialist. He was there within an hour.
And would you say that all the injuries were the result of the fall?
I would.
Thank you, Dr. Mackay. Oh, I'm sure you and your staff did everything you could to help Mr. Stevens.
I'll only keep you a moment, Dr. Mackay. You say that all Mr. Stevens' injuries were the result of the fall?
Yes.
Including the torn ligament in his left arm?
Oh, yes, I think that's a reasonable assumption.
But had it been torn, say, 24 hours before, would you have any way of knowing this?
Well, no.
Well, you'd agree, then, that it is possible for this to have happened, and perhaps in a fight?
Aye, it's possible, but...
Did your examination of Mr. Stevens include the taking of blood tests?
Yes.
What were your findings?
You mean his blood group?
No, I mean, was there any alcohol in his bloodstream? Well, Doctor?
Yes, there was.
How many milligrams?
90.
Oh, Jack Stevens still had 90 milligrams of alcohol in his bloodstream when you examined him. Thank you, Doctor.
The case of Stevens versus the Portland Construction Company will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.